Hey guys, Dan from howtocatchanyfish.com here. Today I'm going to talk about how I rig up to fish for peacock bass in the Amazon. I've got a trip coming up in a couple weeks, so I thought I'd just share some of the things that I'm bringing. Hopefully help some of you with your planning if you ever do a trip like this, which I highly recommend. Super fun trip, probably the best freshwater trip that I've ever taken. There's certainly a lot of people who've done more peacock bass fishing than I have, but I've fished for them in 6 different countries. I've landed over 1,000 of them, so I feel like I know enough to share what's worked for me and hopefully speed up the learning curve for some of you who maybe are just starting to get into this. And hopefully some of you more veteran peacock bass fishermen will find a new tip or trick or two that you hadn't thought of.
Peacock bass are my favorite freshwater fish to catch. They look so beautiful. Each one is unique and distinctive. They fight really hard. They hit lures really hard. They're just an awesome fish. There are a lot of different ways you can catch them, but I try and keep it fairly simple.
There is no more exciting way to catch peacock bass than on topwaters. When they come up on one of those big propeller baits, it sounds like someone dropped a Volkswagen in the water or something. There's typically 2 setups I use for topwaters when I'm fishing for peacock bass in the Amazon, and I'm going to go through them now with you. The first one, the heaviest one, this is for the large propeller type lures, the topwater lures, the ones that you see on TV a lot where they're ripping them across the surface and making a big splash, and there's a huge strike from the peacocks as they come up. So that is the first outfit I bring. You want this one to be pretty short. You don't want a really long rod for this because ripping it, you need to keep it pretty close to the water, and you need to do it really fast, so you want a very stiff rod. You also want a short rod, so this one's a little over 6 feet, a little taller than me. It's got a good fast action tip. For the reel, it's important that you get something with a really fast retrieve. This is an Abu Garcia Revo Beast Rocket, so it has a 9.2 to 1 retrieve ratio. Brings in 43 inches per crank, which is a lot, and you need that to really rip that bait as fast as you can to get the attention of those peacocks and get those big explosions. Attached to the reel, I've got a 55-pound Daiwa Samurai braid. It's a little lighter than some people use for the big prop baits. You can probably get away with 80. They're not really line shy on this, but I like the 55. You can get a lot of line on the reel, and I've never really had any issues with the 55 breaking. So that's this setup. I usually use a leader, so I'm going to use a 60-pound mono leader. For subsurface, I use fluorocarbon most of the time, but for surface, I like mono because it floats and it makes it a little easier to work, and it works the topwater lures a little better. Go to 60-pound mono. Again, the peacock bass are not shy, especially when you're just ripping a topwater super fast, so you can get away with 60-pound. Pretty handy if you get wrapped up in some underwater log or tree or something, which happens quite a bit with these guys. So about 6 feet of this, I use an FG knot, there are other knots that are stronger on a straight pull than the FG, but I found the FG really holds up well after a whole day of casting, so that's really the only leader to braid connection that I rely on. And then lastly is the lure. So there are a lot of different propeller type lures like this. This is a high roller rip roller. It's about 7 inches long. I replaced the trebles with single hooks, and I just like that better. They bend out less easily, better for the fish. When you get a hookup, you get a really solid hookup with that single hook, whereas the trebles sometimes bend out, or they kind of rip up the fish, or they're also, I think, more likely to catch on branches and things. So I go with just the 2 big single hooks and have a pretty good success ratio with that. I like to bring a variety of these lures on the trip. They're not super picky on color usually. It's more about the action and how quickly you bring it in. But here are a couple of the other lures that I like to use with this setup, the heavy topwater setup.
One lure I always like to bring is the big lure Jensen wood chopper. It's one of the original lures people used to bring down to the Amazon. It's got a ton of peacock bass in its day. They're a little hard to find now because they were discontinued, but you can find some on eBay. I still have a couple of original ones that I bought years ago, and they still work great. Replaced all the trebles with singles. It's a little tiring to work. It's a big lure, but it makes a lot of noise and it generates results. Another lure I'm bringing is from K-Lures. It's the double prop woodchopper type lure from a company called K-Lures. One thing I like about this one is that it's through wired rather than having screws. So instead of the hooks being screwed in, which can get ripped out sometimes by the Peacocks, it's wired all the way through, so it can't be ripped out the same way. So that adds a little extra level of protection. I left the trebles on this one because just the way the hooks are attached, they spin around a little bit, and so I didn't feel comfortable with the singles, so I left the trebles. This is probably the only lure I fish with the trebles. I don't fish poppers a lot, but I do like to bring one or two just in case the fish are looking for something different. This is a feed popper. It's a saltwater popper, so it's pretty heavy duty, makes a lot of noise, and I've replaced again the trebles with the single hooks.
The second outfit I bring when I go peacock bass fishing in the Amazon is a topwater spinning rod that I use for walk the dog type lures. Personally, I just find it a little easier to do the walk the dog action with a spinning reel. I also like having a spinning reel because I can reel on the other side, and so if I'm getting tired always casting with a conventional reel on one side, I can switch sides and give my arm a break and use the other side with the spinning reel. I've got a fairly stiff kind of medium action travel rod here. This is a Smith dragon bait jerkbait rod. It's a travel rod, so it's 3-piece, and that helps a lot, not having to bring the big rod tube. So I can get this into about a 36-inch case. Actually, it's a little longer than that, but pretty close to a 36-inch case. Fits in a regular check-in suitcase, so you don't have to check a rod tube, which is a big advantage when you're going these little floatplanes. So I've got the rod with a little bit of give in the tip that helps with the action on the walk the dog type lures. And then for the reel, I've got a Daiwa Surtate 5000 reel, very heavy duty, strong reel from Daiwa, and it's got the 55-pound Daiwa Samurai braid again, which has always been more than adequate for my peacock fishing. Along with that, I tie on a little lighter leader. Usually I use 50-pound for the walk the dog type lures. This is again mono, so it floats, so it helps with the walk the dog action. And this is 50-pound. And then here's a typical lure I might use. This is an Imakatsu Slam Dog Monster. So it's a little bigger than like a Head and Zero Spook or Super Spook. Big rattles, lots of noise. I've got the single hooks again, switched out for the trebles. And when you switch out these hooks on the walk the dog type lures, you want to make sure you check the action, because a little difference in weight can make a big difference in how the lure moves. So before you go down there, you want to test it out in the pool or cast it in a local pond or something. Make sure it still walks the dog with a really nice action and doesn't get messed up from switching out the hardware. But you definitely want to switch out the hardware on all your peacock bass fishing trips. You know, good, strong, maybe owner hyperwire type split rings, and then the 3X at least single or treble hooks, so that once you hook one of those big guys, you don't just get the lure bent out and spit back at you.
I like to start a lot of days throwing the walk the dog type lures rather than the big propeller lures. It just seems like sometimes it takes a little while for the fish to wake up and get really aggressive and want those really big loud lures. And so a little more subtle twitch, walk the dog kind of thing sometimes works better first thing. This is the biggest walk the dog type lure that I bring on my Amazon trips. This is an Evergreen Amazon. It's quite a large lure, but unfortunately for some reason they make the eye holes kind of small, so I have to use two a little smaller split rings than I typically would. But I again switch out the trebles for these big singles. These are owner hyperwire hooks, very strong. This is a really good peacock bass lure, the Imakatsu Tri-Row. You can see this one has gotten pretty beat up from many peacock bass strikes, but still works great. It's not as big as the other two lures, but it's extremely loud. The rattle inside is extremely loud. You can hear it from quite a long ways away. It's very easy to walk the dog with this lure, and it really draws those big peacocks. So this is the box I'm bringing for the big propeller baits. I'm not bringing a ton, just a couple in a couple of different sizes and styles. You don't typically lose a lot of these, especially with the heavy leader. So I feel pretty confident that 6 or 7 will do it for the trip I'm going on. This is my box for the other topwater lures, mostly walk the dog types and then the one popper. So again, you don't tend to lose a lot of these, so just a couple in each style is usually fine. And hopefully you found this video helpful, and stay tuned for part 2 on the subsurface lures I bring.